So we've shared many things. I'm not speaking into the microphone, is that correct? So that's been quite an interesting journey for me as well, to see his work and to share the things that he does as well. And I've been so inspired by the teachings of Jung, and I realised very early in the piece how much Jung influenced me, but I didn't choose to go down the path of becoming a Jungian analyst because I'm too much of an individual for that. I wanted to do my own thing, which I still do. So I've worked in palliative care, disabilities, aged care, and done some research projects into the psychology of dementia and where that's going for people and aged care. That was in a master's, and then I looked at depression for my PhD. So here I am, down in Canberra. We moved from Sydney to Canberra 4 years ago, and now I have a private practice in Lyneham, and I take referrals from around the area, and I also do Zoom sessions, so around Australia as well. So that's me. So tonight, Jean asked me would I do a presentation on mandalas. Mind you, Jean was the artist, but I do a lot of art work, but I'm no artist. And so I was happy to do that. And maybe one day, Jean, we can do one together.
Yeah.
So art, I've always seen a human problem like a circle. Everything is in a circle to me. Life, the world, is a circle. And ourselves are circular. The moon and the sun and the stars and the planets are all circular, and so is the world. So to me, the world in a circle is where the mandala is. And what a person puts into a mandala becomes their story, if we can see where it is that they're going and help them to find their way in that way from a therapy perspective. So tonight we're going to look at the therapy of mandalas, but I'm going to explore also different types of mandalas, but only just touch on them lightly because we've only got a short period of time, so I need to make sure that we have to say what we have to say. So, looking at the mandala itself, it's a form, and everything has a form and a structure in life. And the mandalic form represents psychic unity and completeness. It's a circle, and all of life fits into that. This is our world. Our world, if we just look at how things are much more circular than triangular or rectangular. We could put a triangle inside a circle, we could put a square inside a circle. But essentially, life is whole when there's a circle. And a circle that can circle and spiral and continue to grow, come back to the beginning again, and then grow another circle, and so on and so forth throughout life. So Jung said that the mandalic form represents psychic unity and completeness. And he, as we all know, I'm just reminding us all, that after he split with Freud, he had 4 years of deep contemplation where he discovered the power of the mandala. He went to the East and he looked at all different types of circles, and how he looked at how the mandalic image can arise spontaneously in dreams, in imagery, and creative expression. And he found for himself during that 4 years period that his psychic fragmentation from the trauma he experienced over his split with Freud became whole. In fact, he said, you've slipped. We've said that he said that he drew every day in a circle, and images appeared, and he scribbled in a notebook. And now I think it's further down, don't worry, we'll find it in a minute. So let's have a look now at the types of mandala that there are, because there are many, many types. And I think the mandalic form has become quite popular in Western philosophy now, where it didn't before. We didn't know much about the circle because it was mainly Eastern. So the artistic mandala is when people draw in a circle as an artist. So it's an art form for them. And they create beauty and design within the circle, and they stay within the circle, and everything is very formed and helps us to see the design. It's supposed to help the artist and the perceiver find peace in the symmetry of the design and in the symmetry of the universe, so that the mandala then is seen as a reflection of that. Now, the other one is the Sacred Mandala. And of course, I've particularly gone into Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism in particular, because their philosophy is very focused on the mandalic form. In Tibetan Buddhism, they use mandalas particularly as a symbol of the universe. That represents to them an imaginary place, a palace really, that is they contemplate with many rooms. Each object is significant and represents an aspect of wisdom, guiding principle. And Tibetan Buddhists believe that mandalas help to transform ordinary minds into enlightenment and can assist with healing. So their whole faith system is built on moving towards enlightenment and healing. And they also, you may have been to a sand mandala workshop, I don't know whether you ever have anyway yet. And they're quite amazing things, aren't they? And they go on for 9 days, and then on the last day, they do these incredible coloured sand geometric shapes on the sand, big ones, and then they destroy it. And that is to signify the impermanence of life. So it's we don't tend to think that way, like that, but I think it's very healthy for us to realise that life is impermanent. And the next one is something that we Western people do encounter quite a lot, which is the Sacred Labyrinth. And has anyone walked a labyrinth here? Yes, lots of people, yes.
Actually, we've had a Young Society outing for labyrinths. We can talk more about that later.
Oh, I think it's wonderful to walk a labyrinth. I've done it a few times, and it's wonderful to walk a labyrinth. And it's called the ancient practice of circling to the centre. So here we go again. Here's the mandala in form on the ground, representing the world, helping us to discover self-alignment, life purpose and transition. It's a spiritual tool for divine guidance and insight, and puts our lives in perspective. So to walk the labyrinth is to become a pilgrim. So when people go to walk the labyrinth, they become a pilgrim to go on their own pilgrimage down the path of their own lives. And in order to walk the path of the pilgrim is to take a risk to enter a new world. And the change is something that is very, very big in our lives. None of us like it, but it does change. Everything changes. So the labyrinth becomes like a body prayer and a meditation. And it can take 60 minutes to walk that labyrinth. And many people from many different faiths will come to walk a labyrinth. You don't just have to be Christian or Western or any other, you can just be from anywhere. So now we come to the Therapeutic Mandala. And I do believe that Jung coined this mandala for psychology because he believed that the mandala, drawing a mandala, represents the higher self and aims to serve as a sacred space for a person to discover themselves, to find their sacred centre. And when a client engages in drawing a mandala in the privacy of their own space, on their own, they often have an insight, a thought, oh, I think I'll draw a mandala because I'm feeling like this. Or they have, I just feel like creating something beautiful. And so they sit down and they draw their mandala. Or it can follow a therapy session, which it does in many, many cases with my work. I don't push people to, but I encourage them to. And through the mandala, as you will see in one of my case studies, the mandala offers new insight into the same problem. So when I talk about the world in a circle, from a therapeutic perspective, a person has a problem, and the problem can be seen visually, it can be seen culturally, it can be seen as a problem verbally, and it can be seen musically in sound. But it's still the same problem, and it can manifest in all different ways. If we go into certain areas within the circle and look at these different mediums and modalities to resolve that problem and find new insights into how to do that, then we are creating new possibilities for ourselves to bring about holistic healing. And of course, underlying all of that is the circular nature of consciousness itself, which I believe is circular. It's like a form that just keeps on winding round and round. And it's winding round and round. It doesn't go in a straight line, I don't believe. It goes round and round. And it repeats itself like peeling off the onion skins, putting more layers on it. It's an act of seeing, an act of integration, and an act of knowing, of learning about ourselves. So every time we become aware of our consciousness, we learn. It's a deep knowing, stretched along a dimension of a continuous loop of time. And of course, for us human beings, we need time in order to create structure and balance. Without time, even though it's invented, but we don't understand ourselves very well. Now, I just wanted to touch lightly on aspects of trauma, because many, many people don't understand that when we have a problem, we are traumatized. And trauma can happen at a very deep level. Somebody said to me the other day, this morning actually, if a person has been abused a long time ago, why haven't they brought it up? Why did they wait 30 years to bring it up? Well, of course, the answer to that is they can't talk, they haven't been able to talk about it. It's too deep, it's too without words for them to express in any other way. So, working with children, they can't express the words of how they feel properly, verbally, and we all rely very much on verbal expression, and there's more than verbal expression. So when somebody is so deeply traumatised, as Jenny was, she needed other forms of expression to find the source of her problem. So events that can happen in trauma are obvious and many. Now, we humans are fighting all the time. We never stop having war somewhere in the world. But at the moment, we've had deep trauma with the Afghan war and the Middle East, and we just keep on fighting and fighting and fighting. And Peter Levine talked about how trauma causes loss of connection with society. People become isolated. They can't cope with the complexity of their lives anymore. And it has far-reaching effects on their life because they can become isolated and unhappy and very depressed, and that can cause all sorts of very serious health problems. So when somebody comes to me for a consultation, I will always explore the aspect of trauma and take it into account very carefully and respectfully and see how we can go that way, dealing with it respectfully and delicately. So the effects of trauma, war, you just go back a bit? Slip. My trusty IT person over here, my husband, is wonderful, and he's created all of this PowerPoint. So I've spoken about war. Early childhood abuse is starting to come up to the front. People are starting to talk about it more often. But it's still there in the background, and people often don't want to talk about it because it's so deep and traumatic. And more is coming out about that. And early childhood abuse can often be behind suicide and a lot of dysfunction in our society. Early childhood neglect and betrayal of the person and the child, of the I that is the developing I in a child, not the I, the I inside. Experience or witnessing violence, so vicarious trauma can be just as catastrophic as witnessing, as actually experiencing it. The incidence of rape is enormous at the moment. We seem to be having it, we have reports of it all the time. And catastrophic injuries, terrible things that happen to people in car accidents, in war, and people being maimed and disabled for life and that kind of thing. How do they deal with it? What do they do? That can be very difficult. And life-threatening illnesses. And I'm going to talk to you about some of my case studies in that area where I've worked in palliative care tonight as well. So we're just going to have a quick look. There's not a lot of research on mandala therapy, but there is some. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, very quickly, about some of them. Henderson and Rosen in 2007, they found lots of benefits for healing with mandalas with people with PTSD. And believe you me, there's an awful lot of PTSD out there that goes unrecognised. They had a mandala creation group and a control group. And what they found was that the mandala creation group reported greater decreases in trauma symptoms at 1 month follow-up in comparison with the control group who didn't create mandalas. So the mandala creation group was asked to draw a large circle on their paper and then fill the circle with representations of their feelings and emotions related to the trauma. And they were encouraged to use symbols and patterns and designs and colour, but no words, in order to express what they felt. Miller found, this is an interesting one. I don't know whether you've heard of this one, Jean. Lowenfeld mosaic mandala technique. They're using mosaics, and these are very interesting people. So he researched this technique and found that it can actually enhance the individuation process. So he thought that it could be a useful assessment process, as well as a dynamic and interactive tool for promoting insight and self-understanding. So what he does is the person is given 456, I don't know why that many, but anyway, there you are, tiles of geometric shapes in 6 colours: red, black, yellow, green, blue and white. And they're all arranged systematically in a small portable box, and the individual is asked to make something with the tiles on a standardised sized tray that they get put in front of them. And they sit there and they watch the process, and the people who are doing it, the therapists, evaluate their responses to that, which is quite an interesting thing. I'd never heard of it before until I've researched that one. And then these are Korean people in 2022 who were researching primary dysmenorrhea in young women. And they found that they use mandalas as a way of dealing with pain. And I don't know how many of you who do mandalas can find that you become so engrossed in drawing your mandala that you might tend to forget about your pain for a while, at least. It's a distraction in some ways. And so apparently in this one, mandala therapy was administered twice weekly from one menstruation to the next, and the change of pain was recorded in 10 patients. The results were significant at a 0.05 level, with 6 out of 10 patients reporting significant decrease in pain after the mandala therapy, which is quite encouraging. So mandala art therapy was then recommended as useful. So there's a couple of studies, and I'm hoping that maybe art therapists might do a little bit more. Music therapists do more than research than art therapists. Okay. So here's this quote I was looking for from Jung. I sketched every morning in a notebook a small circular drawing, a mandala, which seemed to correspond to my inner situation at the time. With the help of these drawings, I could observe my psychic transformations from day to day. And he watched himself getting better through the mandalas. Now, I had some very traumatic surgery at the end of 2019, and I did exactly the same thing. I drew mandalas. I've got a whole book of them now. And I followed it. And one mandala highlighted for me that I actually had a residual pelvic infection, and I went to the doctor and I said, I think I might need an investigation on this, and I was put on antibiotics straight away. It was the mandala that showed that. So they can be very revealing, and they can be sort of like a companion for you because they're unconscious processes coming out in the visual daily drawings of the mandalas, and they were very comforting to do. So I think that Jung had a lot to work with there. And his process of his therapeutic mandala was to visualise, to dream and meditate, to draw his mandala, to reflect, and then to write in his journal. Now, I do all of those things, but mine's a slightly different process because I use a lot of creative arts in my work. So we discuss issues together. And then if we're specifically going to draw mandalas, we'll do some relaxation. But first, before we do that, we might do some vocal improvisation and some drumming, possibly, depending on what the client wants to do. And then draw a mandala. And then have a reflection session between the client and the therapist, and then go home and do the journaling. And report on the journaling the next week and perhaps draw some more mandalas. And through the process of the mandalas and the journaling, a lot of insight can be gained into the source of the issue that we're dealing with. So that's my method. Now, also in the method that is very closely associated with mandala work, other myths and legends. A myth is a revelation of the divine in life in, well, Jung said man, but we'll say man and women, won't we? A myth is an ancient story that reveals the archetypes of the collective unconscious. And so the archetypes are those ancient unconscious processes that manifest themselves in everyday life. And it's quite remarkable how they do come out if we start watching for them. And here's some of my mandalas. I drew this one when I was coming out of the surgery a few years ago. And I started to feel that I was on the border of getting better. And I felt that there was a change of consciousness. I read the story of the 3 leaves. Do you know the story of the 3 leaves? It's about transformation and boundaries, the borders between the unconscious and the conscious. It goes like this. Once a poor man's son left home to earn his living. He enlisted in the army of a king who was in the midst of defending his empire. The boy soon became famous for his heroic acts, arousing his men to battle even when their commander was killed and defeat was threatened. After the war, the king gave the boy all he wanted. The hero fell in love with the king's beautiful daughter, who was a bit strange because she would only marry a man who had promised to bury himself with her if she died first. She thought, what use would his life be to him if he lived without me? She would follow him to the grave in case he happened to die first. So that was the deal. And he married her, but she became ill and died. And the brave soldier was buried with her in the vault, which only had enough provisions for a few days. While he was sitting there, a snake approached the body of the dead lady. And he jumped up like the knight that he was. Not while I live, he exclaimed. He threw his sword down and cut the snake in 3 pieces. Shortly afterward, another snake came, but left when it saw the first one. It returned with 3 green leaves, which it laid on the first snake and brought it back to life. The hero took the leaves, put them on the eyes and mouth of his dead wife, brought her back to life, but she was worse than before, which wasn't a very good outcome there. While they were returning by boat to visit the hero's old father, the lady became attracted to the captain, and together they threw the hero overboard in his sleep. And his trusty servant saw the terrible act, fished up the dead body and restored it to life with the 3 leaves that had been preserved on his master's request. When the king heard of the wickedness of his daughter, he had her executed. Now, there's a lot of psychology in that story. Any of you know that story? No, I thought you didn't know that story. You know that story. Well, the leaves focus on changes in consciousness. And the first snake is the taming of compulsion, which constellates the kundalini of the second snake. So the leaves are used by the second snake to heal the first, and these are vegetative experiences that regenerate the energies of doing by harmonising them with autonomic activity. The rebirth of the first snake through the help of the second symbolises the mysterious process of not doing, in which existential problems are resolved not by doing, but by the dream bodies operating spontaneously. So this is the dream body operating, the unconscious. And the snake's about healing transformation, about boundaries, and they look at measurements, they measure things, and they are the boundaries of the border of awareness and the border of the unconscious. So they symbolise limits. They also symbolise the dual purpose of poison and anti-poison. So they heal and they can actually kill. And marriage is seen as an institutional authority that hinders freedom. We all know about that one. The princess' request that the partner be buried alive is her willingness to do the same, would be the ego to commit itself totally to the development of the personality, and the hero upholds ethical standards and cultural ideas. The princess has a fear of dying. She's beautiful, and that's what she needs to be, because she's the collective idea of the given zeitgeist of the feminine. She conforms to the given measurements for feminine behaviour and symbolises conventional ideals about the correct way to behave. The vault is the abode of the dead and the waiting place to go to the next life. And the sword relates to the mastery of the active imagination on the body. So the rebirth of the princess and the betrayal of the hero, the hero is the anima. He defends his nation, and even though this woman doesn't focus his attention on the world, his own femininity is too undeveloped and chaotic, so she has to die. He kills her. He betrays himself by falling in love with the captain. The person who heroically binds himself to deeds who unconsciously identifies with cultural roles performs an act of self-betrayal, because the total personality is made of other components besides paternal heroism. So in other words, we need to couple inner harmonies without obligations, and this is the challenge. And we need to understand what the boundaries are between one world and the next, and bring them together so that we have active imagination, we recognise the unconscious, but we live with this world of reality as it is today. So that's the story of it, and that is what I was inspired to draw here about transformation, because I felt like I was transforming, I was going to a new world. So then followed some weeks later with the Phoenix rising, We all know the story of the phoenix rising, do we not? A beautiful, magnificent bird was burnt in a great fire, and it was destroyed. Wonderful, colourful bird. And this blazing nest completely destroyed the bird. But after the bird had died, a new egg forms in the ashes, and the magnificent creature grows and arises from these ashes once more. So this is the myth of the story of rebirth and transformation. And it's a mandala of hope. And I felt when I drew that mandala, I knew I had to draw the phoenix. I just sat down to draw the phoenix. I felt the phoenix was what the message was from my soul at the time. So they're my collages. And if you want to look at all of Jung's collages, they're over there in the red book somewhere, in the break, if you want to have a look at some of his. I mean, he's amazing. He's a very amazing artist. Now I'm going to go on to look at some case studies to highlight how we see the world in a circle, how we live in a circle, and how we have our world there. So I'm going to talk about a few people. The first two, bear with me, they're a bit sad, but that's all right. We have to deal with sadness in the world. These are about transformation into death, because I did a lot of work in palliative care. And this collage was something that Vicky didn't think she could do. She'd never done anything creative in her whole life. She came into the hospital, she was only 42 and she had cancer of the breast. She had two young girls, 11 and 12, and she'd married a man 40 years older than herself. So she was 42 and he was 82. So of course she expected to be bringing up her children basically on her own. Instead of that, he was going to be doing that, and she was very upset about it all. And she just came in for symptom management, but we all knew that she wasn't going to go home. And she just lay there and cried and cried and cried. She didn't eat, she didn't sleep, she didn't talk, she didn't drink. And the staff started getting worried about her, and the staff said to me, would you go and talk to her and see if you can do something to bring her out of this, because it's no good to her being like that. So she heard me singing to some of the other patients, because I was working as a music therapist. And she called out to me and she said, could you sing me John Denver's song, Perhaps Love? So I did. And through that song, we explored her psychological processes of what is love? Have I loved? Have I been loved? What am I taking to the next world? Do I really want to? I don't want to go there. I'm too young to be dying. And lots of things. I couldn't get a really good photo of this, but anyway, you'll have to just put up with this, the way it is. But she put the passage of time, representing her husband's watch of his time and her watch of her time. She had a funny little man over there in the corner, right-hand corner, asking, what's it all about? I don't know. She represented her anima with the lady and her dog companion, her companion to give her wisdom and help her, like Vasilisa with the dog in her pocket. She put the swimming pool there because she would love to go for a swim. She didn't realise that that was signifying entering her unconscious. We talked about that a bit. And the bubble bath. Well, the bubble bath became a big hit. And we gave her this magnificent bubble bath. And we had the ceremony. And we brought out all the champagne. We were allowed to have alcohol in those days in the hospital. Not anymore, but we did then. And so she celebrated her life in the most amazing way before she finally resolved things and let go and passed peacefully, which was better than not passing peacefully the way she had been. So sometime later, in my own practice there, one of the palliative care physicians asked me, would I see Mr. G? He's a 60-odd man, 60-year-old man. Oh, about 65, I think he was. And this was a long time ago now. And he'd had bowel cancer for a long time and it wasn't getting better and he was not going to survive. But he was really in denial and he couldn't come to terms with it at all. He just denied that he was actually dying. No, I'm not dying, I'm all right. So during our time together, which was about 2 months, 2 or 3 months, we talked about his whole life, all about things that were going on with him and how he felt and thought and saw life. And eventually he began to see that he was bringing the process of his life together so that he could let go and resolve things. And he eventually just agreed to do some mandala work with me. And so I gave him a meditation with Bach's Air on G string. And he sat there and he listened to that. And when he was in there, that meditation, he saw yellow circles floating around, free floating around. And so I said, would you like to draw that? How will that look on the paper? And so that's what he drew, first impression he called it. And we discussed this and I said, you know, the body has circles, all our cells are circles. Have you ever thought of that? And so we discussed how if the body cells are free floating, perhaps his body doesn't want to be here anymore. And that helped him to come to terms with his eventual death. And he did. Now, his second mandala was quite different from the first bit. There is a circle there. This time, in his meditation with me, his wife came to visit him. She had passed quite some time before. And he had missed her a lot because he really wanted her with him while he was so sick himself. So there are the 2 hearts beating as one. And he said, I talked to her, I saw her in my imagery. He said, that gives me hope. I don't mind now. It's all right, I can go. And the 2 trees that the 2 hearts are framed on, they represent new growths, don't they? New growth in a new world beyond this one. And it was very positive. And he said, I think I can let go. There was the cup of elixir of life at the top there. And he said, yes, I think I can go now. So he died a few weeks later and he was quite okay about that. So that's bearing with me now, you know, like we need to look at how mandalas can help people who are at the end of their lives as well as the beginning of their lives, because a mandala goes right through the lifespan anyway. Now, I think that some of you have heard the story of Jenny, but I'm going to tell it again from a mandala perspective. I am going to include some music in it from her journey, but I'd like you to see it now from the mandala perspective, because mandalas formed an incredibly important role in her recovery process. Her story is a phoenix story, one of triumphant recovery and transformation, rebirth into a new Jenny. And this followed a long 8-year psychotic breakdown. She was 54 when I met her in a nursing home up in the Blue Mountains. And she had been sent to live there, and most of the people in her hostel were 80 to 90-year-olds. And she was struggling to come to terms with this. This is where I've come to. I'm just going to be here for the rest of my life. She was given a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder and told that she would never recover from this. It was permanent. She would be on medication for the rest of her life, and her life was over, basically. That's what she told me. She had put on enormous amounts of weight and just felt terrible. So she joined an instrumental improvisation group I was running. And a man in that group, who also had a mental illness, started accosting her because he'd seen her elsewhere outside their facility. And she was getting quite agitated. So I left the group to my students and I took her over to my office and I said, let's sit down and have a chat. You tell me about yourself. I want to know who you are. She said, well, I've got schizoaffective disorder. And I said, I don't want to know about that. That's not you. I want to know about you. She said, no one's ever asked me that before. I said, well, I'm asking you because I want to know. So she told me about herself in amazing, no uncertain terms. And her drawing here came in the first session after I heard her story. And I had a little autoharp there as a zither. I got it out on the desk and I said, I want you to listen to my reply because I'm not going to give it to you in words. This is my reply to your story. So I improvised with my voice on the autoharp. And then I said, now I don't want you to give me any words back in response to my response. I want you to draw. So here's a circle, here's some crayons, you draw. So she drew this one. And I said, oh, rainbows outside the circle, nothing inside the circle. I said, how do you feel? She said, empty. I'm worried about that empty centre. Now, that empty centre from an existential theoretical perspective told me an ocean of information, gave me a lot of information about her and where she was coming from. She had lost her sense of identity. Her sense of emptiness was because she'd lost her higher self. She didn't know who she was anymore. She had to learn to find it. That was her quest, her heroine's journey, the quest for herself. So I said to her, let's go back to the music room. They'll all be gone by now. I've got some drums there and I'd like to have a conversation with you on the drums. We don't need words. So we went back there and before we did the conversation, I had some Tibetan bowls and I donged these bowls all over her body and she felt all this vibration. She said, whoa! And then she started playing the drums with me. And we played the same drum and we communicated, had a conversation of drumming. Now, she told me earlier in my office that she had not been able to cry for 8 years. She was so bent up inside that she couldn't cry. And halfway through that drumming, she screamed out, I'm going to cry, I'm going to cry. And I said, good, cry. And I gave her the box of tissues and off she went. And she was stunned and she said, well, I'm never going to do that again. And I said, well, don't you say never. Never say never to me. That's not where this belongs. So she then agreed to start therapy sessions with me twice a week. And after 10 months of that, I thought she's still not crying. So I introduced vocal improvisation therapy. And each session involved counselling conversations and where we identify a significant issue, take it to the music. I'd say, let's take this issue, what would you like to take to the music? She'd say, I want to take this one. Okay, let's go. So let's see what the music has to say about this issue. And so we would start these vocalisation conversations as well. No words. And when she sang with me that day, this time she felt the layers of her eye coming to the surface, struggling to be heard. She held this urge inside her to be heard above me. And I was singing with her. And you'll hear this in a minute in the recording. And as she sang higher and louder, she was determined to be heard. And she called the mandala, I will be heard. And that's what she drew. Now, obviously, her self was so undeveloped there that she had gone back to the childhood stage, very, very young childhood stage. She needed to grow up again, and she needed to do that in psychological processes. So we're going to listen to her and myself singing. Now, she's the one that's singing La La. So this is a nice harmonic one. Robert?
Just bring the microphone over to you.
Now that's all very harmonious,
Take
isn't
the
it?
microphone again.
Sorry?
Take the microphone back.
Oh. My knees are playing up tonight. Okay, there we go. Is that right? Yeah. That's all very harmonious. And it'd be nice if that was how it went all the way along. But no. No, no, no. That was too harmonious, wasn't it? With all of that trauma inside her, so much trauma, we needed to get further in there. We needed to have her crying. We needed to have her shouting and stamping her feet and letting it all out. So we worked for 4 whole months on this. I have a whole book of her mandalas and a whole book of her journalings, because each time she would be asked to journal. And this happened in June of that year. And back in January of that year, she had a dream about passage through hell, she called it. And she just, and she took it over and said, look at that, and she gave it to me. We talked about her dream. We did a lot of dream work. But she didn't understand that the process was unfolding gradually over the 4 months of our work together. So this time she came to me and she said, I think I'm ready to do some bigger work. So, okay. So let's do more instrumental improvisation. Let's identify the problem that is bothering you today. And let's take it to music itself, not just the voice, to all the music. I'll play the piano, I'll accompany you, you do all the crying and the vocalising, and you've got chimes, and you've got drums, and you've got bells, and you've got percussion instruments all over the place. So off we went. Now the session went a lot longer than what you're going to hear, but it's extremely confronting because this was the pivotal moment of letting go. And she drew exactly the same mandala as she drew in January. And I looked at it and I said, you've done this before. Oh, have I? Yes, you have. Let's look through. Yes, there it is. So what did you dream about then? Now look what's happened. We've worked through that dream for 4 months and here we are. So don't get upset because she's an amazing woman now. Let's hear her interaction and what actually happened towards the end of that particular excerpt. Robert? so the process of that was quite extraordinary, really. Thank you. Jenny and I have been to many conferences and played this, so don't worry, she's very, very familiar with it now. She finished and she sat in a corner and she just sobbed and sobbed. So I went and sat with her. I sat down and just sat there. And after a while she said, I'm a 4-year-old girl under a tree. I don't know what I'm doing there. Okay. Let's just sit there. We'll sit there together. That's all right. So I have no mouth. I'm perfectly useless. Roy was her partner at the time. He's in charge of me. And they came so thick and fast. And it got to such a big, big climax. And as I was playing, I was singing, I was echoing back. But I was using, for purposes of anyone who's a musician, different open chords, fifths and fourths, to let her go in there and create what she needed. And some of the staff walking past the music room saying, what's she doing in there? She must be killing her, you know. And so she came out. She went back and I said, now I want you to draw a mandala. And then she drew the mandala, we discussed it. She realised that she'd done it before. She went home and found it, back to her room. She worked on her journal. Her journal's so raw on this session, I can tell you. After that, she went home and I thought, I wonder if she's going to be all right. I mean, you always take these risks, you know, with people. Did I go too far? But no, it was a good process. It went well. She came back like a vibrantly alive woman, something that we'd never seen before. She lost a stone in weight within a few months. She decided that she didn't need her meds, so she went to see her psychiatrist and said, I want to go off all my meds. And the psychiatrist was so impressed with how well she was, he said, you can't possibly have schizoaffective disorder because people don't get better from that. You must have psychotic depression. And she said to me, do you think that'll do? And I said, yes, that'll do. It's just a label anyway. We don't care about that. And so she let her go at that. She then she'd been a social worker, so she took herself off to Centrelink and she got herself a proper pension and she went to housing. She got herself a house, a place to live in, back in Blackheath and back to the community where she'd lived most of her life and started to get her life together again. Since then, she's now living out in, further out, Lithgow. She's looking to come back into Blackheath soon. And she's grown into an amazingly bubbly, amazing woman. Have a look at her. There she is in 2002 when I first met her. There she is 18 months later, and there she is today. Now, she's not the same woman as she. The photos say it all, don't they? And when I take her along with me to conferences and I stand up there and I talk about her, they all say, oh, what happened to her? And I said, well, you can ask her. There she is. She gets up and she talks about herself and she's very happy to do that. She went off to TAFE and she became a consumer advocate for mental health consumers. And she's still that today. And she's asked to go every year to Sydney University and teach the medical students on how it feels to be in a padded cell and how it feels to be psychotic. Now, she was also very deaf. She lost her hearing when she was about 16, and I do believe that probably drove her to it. And she was also, during going through the menopause, and that would have been a big influencing factor as well. But she has had only one very short little episode when she became very ill, so she now knows not to let herself get that ill, but she was better within a month and offered meds again. She said, no, I'm not taking them. So she hasn't taken any meds ever since. That was 4 years ago. She's coped with breast cancer. She's gone through all the chemotherapy. She's just amazing, and she's faced so many challenges in her life. Her family's rejected her because she's not supposed to get better. They didn't like me for that either. And so she lives her life as herself. She's her own person, and she's proud of it. Yeah. In summertime, she puts nail polish on her toes and says, I don't need to wear shoes, I'll just wear thongs, like people can like me in the way I am. So I think that is a transformation of enormous proportions. It doesn't happen very often. I'm privileged to witness this transformation. It was a very big honour for me to watch somebody's psychic healing, the fragmented parts of her inner self, her eye, that were all over the place. Like Mr. G's cells that were floating around, free floating. She was too, but it was her psychic fragmentation of which she was so bad. She lost so much weight. She's a beautiful looking girl now. And at 70, how old is she? 73, I think she is. She's very active and very much part of her community. So that's Jenny. Any questions?
What was her initial traumatic experience that made her feel this way?
It was a psychic psychotic breakdown. She became very ill, and it wasn't the result of any particular trauma that said I've been, abused or I've had an accident or anything like that. It was a whole combination of a whole lot of events that happened to her over her life that she had buried, and we had explored right throughout her life. The rejection, the abandonment from family, the non-acceptance of herself as a person, the low self-esteem, the low self-confidence, and it just became worse and worse. It came over a period of time, which I think is a really good thing that we need to look at, that we need to keep ourselves mentally healthy as much as we possibly can, so that doesn't happen to us. And sometimes we don't know, it's just going to happen, but most of the time it doesn't happen. And she knows now to look after herself, and she has done that very well. Now, I want to introduce you to June, not her real name. Jenny is her real name because she asked me to tell people what her real name was, but June is not her real name. But this is an extraordinary woman who's still part of my practice. She is highly intelligent, in her late 60s, and has had an 8-year diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. And she'd been a CEO of a disability organisation, so she understands disability very, very well. She lives in Sydney with her husband of over 40 years and 2 married daughters and 6 grandchildren. Her mother is in her 90s and living on the Central Coast, and is amazing. She's like her mentor, his ongoing mentor. So one day she rang the helpline of Parkinson's New South Wales, where I was working as a counsellor, and said that she needed some support. So she met me, and she decided that I was safe enough to confide in. So the next time she arrived, she walked dramatically in with this huge big quilt and threw it on the floor of my office, and then sat down and started to describe. Now, this square meant that was when I was 10. This one here was when I was 20. This happened to me there. This happened to me here. Each part of the quilting represented a part of her life. And I was sitting there in amazement thinking, you've just done a mandala in quilting, and you did it all on your own. How amazing. And so this particular one was given to me by her as a gift, and I have it very proudly as a coffee table set for me, and I think of her every day, but I don't have to really, because she's still my client, so I see her, talk to her quite a lot on Zoom. The next one is another example of what she can do But she's got so many of these quilts now. She does quilting classes, she does all sorts of things. She is able to express, she's a very organised person because having been a CEO, she knows how to deal with other people's problems. So she deals with her own the same way she deals with other people's problems. Now, and then she'll come to me with the most incredible, complex list of things, you know. Now I want you to help me do this and do that and do something else because this has happened, that's happened, and I've identified it and I want you to identify it so that you can give me some tips. So we go through them in order. So it's very, very rational and cognitive. She got a terrible shock when she came down with Parkinson's. Her husband had a heart attack when he was in his 30s in 1981, and so he hasn't been a lot of help to her. And so we've had many, many sessions of tears and sobbing and tissues and going through one trauma after another, after another, after another. And I'm firmly convinced that after working with people with Parkinson's for 6 years now, I don't have research evidence, but I'm pretty sure that Parkinson's can develop from severe trauma, because I see so many people who have been traumatised significantly in their lives by Parkinson's, develop Parkinson's as they get older. So I think it's just the body saying, we've had enough, that's it. But you know, in the 5 years she's been my client, she hasn't deteriorated. We've coped with, 2 years ago, she rang me up one day and she said, I've left my husband. I said, oh, gosh. I asked myself, did I cause that? She said, I need to discuss this now. I need to discuss what I'm going to do. So she got herself all worked out there. She left him for about 3 months. And then she decided that she would come back, providing he would do this, and the next. And he is a difficult man, and he has been hard to live with. Very switched off man, doesn't communicate, but he's tried very hard. And so the struggle has been enormous for the two of them, but they're still working it through, and they're going to keep working it through because they're both committed to the process of a marriage to make it work. Now, it's not just making a marriage work, it's a relationship. It's what do we want out of it? Where are we going to go? So a lot of the therapy with her is now focused on how she can make her relationships work, because her two daughters, they're wonderful and they understand her. She's trying to get to a point where today it was, how are you going to age with him successfully? And what will you be doing with that? And so she's exploring that right now. And the way I approach my clients is, you are a very intelligent woman. Inside you is your eye. You have your answers to your own problems. My job is to help you find those answers and to deal with it in your own way. And whatever you decide to do, I will support you. And you can share with me, I'll walk the journey with you, but I will not give you therapy so much as support. So that's the kind of thing she does. So when she said she's never, before she got Parkinson's, she'd never developed any kind of creative activity at all. And all of a sudden she found herself doing all this quilting. So she's now maintaining herself in a very good way. When I'm a consultant to Concord Hospital, where she's a patient as well. So I consult with her neurologist as well, and I'm in their sort of medical team and the clinic there as well. So there's a lot of toing and froing. I do regular psychometric tests on all my Parkinson's people every 6 months, and the hospital gets those records and it goes in their files, and they know they don't have to get anybody else to check these people out because they've got me there. So that's a good thing too. And she's just working towards one day at a time here, and learning to cope with everything just the way it is. She's doing very well. Now, the next one is Anthea. This isn't Anthea, this is her portrait. Anthea didn't do mandalas, but I want to include her in this because she, again, it's not her real name. She's also an extraordinary woman, and she's 61. So she's a few years younger than, what did I call her? I was going to say her real name for a minute. June. But they now attend a drumming online class with me as well, where I've introduced drumming for Parkinson's. And she was a hairdresser. And one day, when she was cutting her client's hair, she discovered that her left hand wasn't working very well at all. In fact, it almost stopped working. She thought, I can't do this hairdressing anymore, I'm going to have to give it up. So she went to her doctor and he sent her to a neurologist, and that neurologist told her that she had Parkinson's disease, and she was devastated. And that was 15 years ago. So she was a young woman when this happened to her. She had you asked about trauma, she had a serious traumatic experience with a very, very nasty domestic violence incident with a partner that she was living with, who nearly murdered her. And she came so close to losing her life. She doesn't even know today how that didn't happen. So she now, she is so grateful. She's a bubbly, outgoing person. She suddenly discovered art. It just happened, just like the other one, June, she discovered quilting. And she'd never done that before. So this is actually a common phenomenon of people who develop this kind of disease. So we had some very deep and lively sessions while I was there in Sydney, and she's continued with me as well ever since. So they've all been with me for 5 years, these people. We just connected, I think, probably more than anything. She joined a few support groups and she started looking for meaning and purpose in her life. It's been up and down. And we go with every up and with every down. I'm the first person they come to, port of call. You know, I've had this fall, or I've had this has happened, or something else has happened, or what about my levodopa meds? Should I go and have another assessment? And I'll say, okay, let's assess you. And I'll write to your neurologist, I'll get in touch with them. So that's how it all goes. So we're just part of her medical team now, and she went to see this well-known neurologist at Macquarie University, who is well known for motor neurone disease more than Parkinson's. And she just wanted a consultation to find out what another aspect of Parkinson's. And he was quite helpful, but she was taken with him, just the person he was, because here she was painting people, and he had a very interesting face. So she said, can I paint you? And he said, oh, okay, here's a photo, go off and do the painting. So this was the result of the painting, and he loved it so much he's got it hanging up in his office. And he says, I patient this for me. And so she's very, very proud of that one. And then the next one is her carer, who comes to help her go walking and shopping and talking and things like that. And she's painted this whole portrait with her carer. She asked me, would I allow myself to be painted by her? And I said, sure, when you're able to, I'd love you to. So she's on the road to that at the moment. But she's learned to find her special eye. She's learned to find herself in all of this, because it's her own expression coming out through the form and structure and colour of her paintings. She does landscape as well, but she's more involved in finding the eye in other people that she can paint and bring it out and bring the essence of who that person is. Very special. Like, she's brought the essence of that person out. And I'm absolutely amazed with the kind of work that she does. So we're nearly finished. tonight we've looked at mandalas from different perspectives. We've looked at the types of mandalas, and we've looked at the therapeutic mandalas and how mandalas don't necessarily have to be in a circle, but they probably are all the time anyway. Even the portrait is a mandala. Can you go to the next slide? Oh no, keep going. We're not doing drawing today. I've got time. Keep going. Keep going. Yeah. So, music and art are like defaults in our system. They're the place to go when we can't find words. They're the place to go when we need to find solutions and insights, but we can't find them in words, in verbal dialogue, and our thinking can get all scrambled. They can buffer serious effects of trauma, and that like transitional objects, like Winnicott's transitional objects, and archetypal symbols that can enable us to softly visit the trauma. We can do a drawing, we can sing a song, we can play a drum. We don't have to talk about the trauma, it sits there. And they know that when they offer me a piece of their artwork or their musical improvisation, I'm going to take it and hold a space for them so that they can feel safe again and they can go forward in their lives and start to explore what else is out there for them, what else can they do with themselves. So this is a way of building resilience, to use our art and use the whole concept of the circle and the roundness and the mandala and the wholeness, building psychic wholeness from psychic fragmentation that is quite possible. I mean, I've only given you 5 case studies. I could be here all day doing it. But when we experience life in a circle, when we think outside the square, nature talks to us. And we find circles everywhere in nature, everywhere we walk. Go looking for the circles in nature. You'll find them there. And when we do find them, we come back to the place where we started. And we begin again on our soul's journey to find the self at the centre of our being. We can return again to dig and search in our own field for that essence and pearl of eternity and the fundamental essence of our higher self, and start yet another cycle of transformation as we all journey towards finding the higher self. So that's the end of my talk. Now we're going to do a mandala. Have I got time, Dean? Am I going over too long? You want supper first?
Yeah, I think we can do supper.
Okay, can you do supper, then we'll all do a mandala.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Yeah, we'll go that way.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Look, it took too long, sorry.
No, you've given us so much. It's amazing. Thank you very much. We'll all have a cup of tea, and you'll be able to stay at the toilet, whatever you need to do. Refreshments, get a cup of coffee or tea, and refreshments over here. Okay, so we'll have about 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes. 10 minutes refreshments, and then we'll go.
could hear the sound.